Lisa Holt is a relationship coach who helps strong, avoidant, successful women to stop running away from and start running to long term love. She also teaches people how to find their voice to effectively communicate and build solid relationships, which, goodness. So she's here to talk to us today about communicate with ease. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
I
Thank
know
you for
I
having
know
me.
communication's a hot button in relationships. It just there's so many stories. I know you got 'em. But before we dive in there, you've got a really interesting history, so please share with us how you became a relationship coach.
Okay. So I have to rewind back, starting with I'll start with my childhood very briefly. I grew up in a home where we read each other's minds, right? So
Mm,
what that looked like is if I needed something, if I felt something, my dad or my stepmom or my brothers, we just knew. I
hmm,
didn't have to say what was on my mind. It just magically was happening. And so how that affected me later was when I graduated from high school and college. I was actually on my own in college. I didn't have a roommate for the most part. I had an initial dorm mate, but she was never there. So for all this purpose, I didn't have any roommates. And so
mhm.
when I graduated college, my best friend that I had grown up with gave me a call and said, "Hey, what are you going to do? Now that you've graduated?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, let's move to California." And I was like,
Oh, wow.
"Yes, let's do it." So we moved to California and all we could afford was this 500 square foot studio apartment. And
Mm,
and so imagine a 500 square foot space with two full-size beds and and two people who grew up with
yeah.
very different backgrounds sharing this space. I quickly realized I did not have the tools to communicate my needs.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm guessing she wasn't a mind reader like your family.
Not a mind reader.
Mhm.
And I remember being shocked. I was like,
Yeah.
"Why can't she read my mind?" And so through this experience, I learned at the age of 23 that I needed to learn how to communicate. And so I basically went on this quest of really honing in on being able to express myself and express myself in a way that I could share my thoughts and feelings effectively.
Mm.
And at that time I was a hairstylist. I was actually a hairstylist for 23 years. And
Wow.
yeah, and being a hairstylist, you're talking to people all day.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
day long, I had people sitting in my chair, and it was an opportunity for me to not only practice my talking skills, I was also practicing my listening skills.
Yeah.
And so around, let's see, that was around 2013, I hit this point when I went to the hair salon, and I owned a hair salon for the last 10 years of my hairstylist career, and went to the salon and just was not feeling it. I
Mm.
said, I something's got to change. And at that point, I thought, well, maybe it's PMS. Maybe I'm just having an off day. And so the next day, woke up, same feeling. And
Hmm.
I'm the type of person, if something is not working, it's time to do something different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of that to say, I decided to move to Houston at that time. My biological mom lived there, and I didn't grow up with her. And I thought this was a perfect transitional space for me to spend time with my mom, getting to know her.
Yeah.
Once again, I had an
Mhm.
opportunity to use my communication skills. Right? And so fast forward to where we are now. I learned a lot over the course of my adult life, and I came to that turning point. I became a personal trainer at that point because fitness had been the thing that allowed me to heal. I
Mm,
really delved into fitness at the time in my life when I was doing hair, and I thought it helped me so much. I'm going to become a personal trainer and help other women be able to have the transformation that I had physically and mentally. And
sure.
quickly realized that fitness was not the avenue that everyone needed, right? And so along the way, some of my personal training clients actually said to me, they said, "You're more of a life coach." And I
Wow.
thought, okay, yeah, I can see that. And so
Yeah.
I started to naturally transition into coaching with some of my personal training clients, and the topic of communication kept coming up.
Yeah.
And so I had gotten into a relationship with my now husband, and again, opportunity to learn how to communicate better. Right?
Yeah.
So that's been my journey, and yeah, here we are.
That's so awesome. I mean, of all the things that we're taught in school and not taught in school, we're not taught at all how to effectively communicate. Like, and there are so many instances especially in couplehoods where particularly women in a male-female dynamic are like, well, he should just know. He should just know. And it's like, did you tell him? Well, he should just know. Maybe tell him.
Right. My husband
So,
actually said that to me.
mm,
Because if you
yeah,
don't tell me, I won't know.
I don't know. My partner has given me really, really great feedback about communication in that, Michelle, how long have you been thinking about that thing you just said to me? Um, he's like, probably hours, maybe days. So how long do you need before I respond to you? Like, can I take a minute and process this? Oh yeah, yeah, I guess that makes sense. So communication definitely a necessary topic. Um, so let's dive in. What are some of the biggest like communication obstacles that you've seen in terms of relationships?
Oof. So many, but it really boils down to the foundation of my own relationship, because ultimately the work that I do in all of its iterations has been founded on my own experiences, and then I
Yeah.
layered education on top of it, right? Um, but one of the foundational experiences I had was when I started dating my husband. We were long distance, and
Mm.
so the communication factor was just, phone, text messaging. I would see him, every 5 to 6 weeks. Perfect for the avoidant version of Lisa. I didn't know that at the time. Right?
Mhm.
But what happened is when we did decide to get married, we got married, moved in, bought our house, moved in, and I noticed pretty quickly that we were having a lot of what we call discussions.
Mm.
And I reached a point where I was like, I don't want to have any more discussions. Why are we having these discussions? Right? And and my husband was very clear, right? Like he understood and expressed to me. He said, "We're having these discussions now so that we can work through these things so that we don't have to deal with them later."
Yeah.
And I remember at that time going, "Okay, okay." Right? Coming from a home where I didn't have to navigate conflict,
Right.
right? It didn't make sense to me at first. And
Mm.
so one of the things that I feel very fortunate is that I've always shown up in life with an open mind. And so even if I don't know something, or even if it doesn't quote unquote make sense to me, I show up open. And
Mm,
so marriage was the ultimate test of that, right? Of
yeah.
how open can you be? Right? And so what that taught me is that, okay, I have been told in my life over the course of, up to that point, 10 years, how excellent of a communicator I was because of the work I had done, right? And then I show up
Mhm.
to marriage and I'm going, what happened? I thought I was an excellent communicator. I've done all this work, right? Why is there an issue? And and so that was the foundation for me, because all of a sudden I had to say, okay, Lisa, you haven't mastered it yet. It's time to continue the work. And
Mhm.
so I continued to learn. And it was around that time that I decided to go back to college and get my master's degree in counseling. And through that experience of educating myself first,
Mhm.
I was really shocked because that degree was not just a degree. It was an education for me and how I could navigate my own relationship better and then
Mm.
help other people, right?
Yeah.
And one of the, to come to your question, one of the foundational courses that I went through during my master's degree was a communication course. And I know you mentioned about, we weren't educated on how to communicate.
Mhm.
I remember going through that course and thinking, why did we not start out in kindergarten?
Yeah,
Right? We have math
right.
and reading and science all through school. Why don't we have communication as a mandatory subject?
Yeah.
And so I'm going through this course, at, I was I was late 30s, right? Going through this course, learning skills of how to communicate better, and going, this is a master's degree. I should have learned this. The whole of humanity should be learning
Mm.
this material in
Yep.
high school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was just really impactful for me, and I've taken
Mm.
a lot of those tools that I learned and implement them with, first in my own relationships, and then share them with clients.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, there's so much, that we could talk about in terms of communication, from the, "Oh, well, they should just know," to the, "Well, I feel like," well, that's actually not your feeling, that's your belief or your assumption or your judgment, like, let's be clear with our language, what word we really are wanting to use here, you know, because that's just something else I hear a lot. "Well, I feel like you're whatever," and it's like, "Well, that's not a feeling." Not a feeling. Um, I get you. Like, I know there's a feeling in there somewhere, but that specifically is not a feeling, so let's be really clear with our language. Um, when communication is off on a relationship, I mean, that's just it's like the beginning and the end, isn't it? Like, there's really, unless they can go back and work on it, work on the communication, it's the beginning of the end. So,
Yeah.
do you have any tips that you could share with people on ways that they can, like, effectively communicate in with their partner?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things that I typically address is that a lot of times when there's miscommunications within relationships, it's usually because people are trying to avoid conflict, right? Like,
Yes.
and so one of the first things that I express to clients is that conflict is necessary within a relationship. And I always get this look like, what? I thought that was the thing to avoid, right?
Right.
And I'm going, "No, I had to learn this too," right? I'm
Yeah.
speaking to the choir, and I tell people, conflict is inevitable.
Mhm.
It's inevitable. But the key to navigating conflict well is learning how to communicate well. And
Yeah.
and so one of the biggest tools that I use is called the talker listener card. And it sounds goofy, right? And I wish that I had the card handy. But I can explain it. Um, Typically, when or let me rewind back. When I learned this formula or framework, I decided to test it out on my husband. I thought, this seems too simple, right? Right?
Honey, we're gonna be a guinea pig here. Yeah.
Right? So he had no idea. But for me, it was important to test it out because I'm going, if I'm learning these skills and I'm supposed to be working with clients using these skills, I need to know it works firsthand. And
Yes.
so the talker listener card, basically the premise of it is that in any communication, you have a talker and you have a listener, right?
Mhm.
And each of those people has a goal. And the talker has a goal of sharing their thoughts and feelings, right? And the important piece to that is that most people, they're like, yeah, I want to share my thoughts and feelings, right? and and the important piece to that is that when you're the talker, you're typically the one that's bothered. You're bothered
Mhm.
by something, right?
Yeah.
And it's key to remember that if you're going to be an effective talker, meaning you're going to share your thoughts and feelings, you need to be able to do that in a way that the listener can hear you. And the
Yeah.
only way that the listener can hear you is if you share those thoughts and feelings without judgment, without labeling, without attacking,
Mhm.
right? And when you remove these negative connotations from the conversation, it looks something like this. If a talker is bothered, let's say let's say my husband hasn't taken out the trash. I'm bothered because it's going to be smelly. He hasn't taken the trash
Mhm.
out, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm going to share my thoughts and feelings without all of these things, right? It looks something like, honey, when when the trash is not taken out, I feel stressed,
Mhm.
right? Because then I'm not attacking him. I'm
Right.
not judging him. I'm just sharing my thoughts and feelings. Right. And so I give people this framework of the sentence looks like this: when blank, I feel blank.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
simple. Right.
Yeah.
And so then you turn it over to the listener. And the listener's job is to make sure that they understand and clarify what the talker said, right? And how that's done, the simplest way that it's done is through what's called parroting.
Mhm.
You say exactly what you heard them say. And it's fascinating because most people either think that that's too simple, it can't possibly work if I repeat what the person said, right? Or they just can't repeat what the person said.
Yeah.
And and it's this fascinating thing that happens, but the piece to it that's really important is that the listener's job is to express what they heard, right? Clarify and understand what the talker said without advising,
Mhm.
That's a hard one for people without defending, right? And there's another one that I'm trying to think of right at the moment, but the two main ones are without advising, without defending, and without agreeing or disagreeing.
That's a huge one that a lot of people don't realize. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and it's fascinating because I'll share my own default, which is what was part of the discussions that I would have when I first got married, is that I would always find the need to defend myself,
Yeah.
right? And defending looks a little different than what everybody tends to think, right? Because defending is also explaining.
Mhm.
And that was my default. Well, this is why I did that. Here's why. Here's why.
Mhm.
Right? Let me explain why, because then maybe you'll understand.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
it's defending, right? Because
Yeah.
then I'm not allowing my husband to feel heard for what his thoughts and feelings are. I'm shifting it to me,
Mhm.
right? And that's a big thing that I go through with clients that is just it's life altering. And I'll tell you this is that when I explored this with my husband without him knowing, right? I was shocked. I was shocked when he would share something with me and I would use this tool. And how I knew it worked was because after I said what I heard from him,
Mhm.
stop, and he would ask me for my thoughts.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
That's super fantastic, and the piece about defending, like, I know that my with my history and then with my clients, like, I see that come up particularly in people who have either had some kind of verbal or emotional abuse or bullying, heavy criticism. So, that's an easy default, right? We want people to understand us. We kind of, tendency to like, oh well, but there's reasons and um so I think that that's a really valuable piece of information there. And then you're I completely concur that, like, people just don't want to have any kind of, confrontation or conflict in their relationship, but I'm like, everybody's got it. Like, what's the percentage from the Gottman Institute? Like 63, 64% of conflict in relationships is unsolvable. Unsolvable. It's 100% about how you communicate with it. And I love sharing that with people because it's like it gives them permission. Like, y'all don't got to get along all the time. It's okay. It's how you talk about it. Yeah.
100%. Like I one of the things that was challenging for me is that the home that I grew up in, I never saw conflict. Never.
Mm,
And so what that told me is that I was to strive to not have conflict.
mm.
I never saw my parents argue. I never saw them even give me a glimpse that they ever disagreed on anything.
Wow.
So as far as I was concerned, right?
Yeah.
You were going to be with the person that you were supposed to be with because you were never going to disagree. You were never going to have conflict. So when I was having these discussions with my husband, I'm going, something's wrong.
Yeah. Right.
There's
Maybe I'm not
conflict,
supposed to be here. Right.
right? Right? And it's fascinating to me because in hindsight, I go, okay, my parents just were trying to protect the image,
Mhm.
right? And show a
Yeah.
good, healthy environment to their kids, and completely understood, right? But it left me unprepared, right? And I had to learn, right? I had to learn
Mm.
that
Yeah.
conflict can be really, really helpful because one of the things that my husband shares with me is that when we would have these moments of quote unquote conflict, he said, we're just picking all the dandelions out, right? And I remember thinking, oh, this makes total sense.
Yeah.
Conflict is just the dandelions. And so if you
Mhm.
don't pick them, right, it's gonna take over the whole area.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also like a perfect example of I don't care who you are, what kind of environment you grew up in, everybody's got their stuff, right? Everybody's got their opportunities to learn and grow through. And because I had the kind of the opposite experience and it was very conflict heavy, but because of that, I too wanted to avoid, right? Like so there was that in me. So it's like two totally different backgrounds, but we had the same mechanism in there, you know? Now here, let me just explain to you where I'm coming from. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Oh, fantastic. So I love the speaker listener idea. Just having that, tool in the toolkit and the reflective listening, like you said, the parroting, like that helps that speaker to know that you were paying attention and that you got it. And then that goal of feeling understood gets met with understanding, you know? So asking those clarifying questions also like helps you to know your partner better because we think we know them so well, right? But asking those clarifying questions helps us get to the root of that understanding and like, okay, because I may not get it at your explanation, but let me ask more questions because I really want to get it because you're important to me. This is important to me.
Yeah. And listening effectively says that.
Yeah.
Listening says what you have to say is important, right? And
Hmm.
if I'm defending myself or if I'm disagreeing or advising, I'm saying that what I have to say is more important,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's very key within a relationship is to allow the person to feel heard for exactly what they said and what they mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really challenging for some people to not come in with the advice or the desire to fix it or anything like that because we and I just had this conversation. So many of us are uncomfortable with uncomfortable feelings, right? And so we just want to like smooth it over, make everything nice and palatable because it doesn't feel good to have bad feelings. So we just want to like make everyone okay, including ourselves. But when we can just be in the center of that and allow for it, there's such a potential of growth there, in learning through that and a deeper understanding and awareness of ourselves in it. Yeah. So, what else? What's another kind of communication tool that you can share with folks to to
Um,
to get them really working it?
yeah. So there are a number of other tools that I use. The one thing that I really have been putting a lot of emphasis on lately is the concept of acknowledgement.
Mm,
And and it sounds very simple, but acknowledgement goes so far in
yeah.
any kind of relationship, right? And that's something that my husband and I have really taken on, and it has really just shaped and grown into this thing that even in I just finished up teaching a course, and we do one whole class on acknowledgement. and
Wow.
and I'm always just stunned and surprised at how many of us don't actually have an accurate understanding of what it means to acknowledge someone. right? And so when I ask a person sometimes, what does it mean to acknowledge? They usually will just say something like, "Oh, I said thank you to them." Or, "Oh, I said this," right? And usually it's just manners, right?
Mm,
Usually people think that manners means that they acknowledged someone. And one of the things I've really delved into this and taken it on, and I said, I'm gonna figure this thing out. Why is it more? Like what makes a response an actual effective acknowledgement? And what I have found is that there are two things that are necessary for someone to feel acknowledged, or for someone to feel heard and seen,
okay.
right? And the two things are, it does require courtesy, which is manners, right? But it also requires recognition.
Mm,
And what that looks like is, the courtesy would be the thank you. The recognition would be, I see what you did, right? Which is
yeah.
simple. But it does take a little bit of tweaking in the mind, because we're so quick to go, okay, thank you, and then we move on, right?
Mhm.
And and what I have found is that if we just pause, and for instance, I'll use myself as an example. One of the things that makes me so happy is when my husband mows the yard. I love a mowed yard,
Yeah.
right? And if my husband had it his way, it probably wouldn't get mowed quite as often, right? He's kind of
Okay.
wants to be doing,
Yeah.
right? So what I figured out is, if I acknowledge him for what he does when he mows the yard, he's more inspired to do it again, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so what that looks like is, when he mows the yard and he comes in all sweaty and covered in grass and everything, I stop him at the door, and I take his hand, and I say, "Thank you. It makes me so happy that you took time out when you could have been doing something else, and you mowed the yard. It
Mm,
makes me feel so happy."
yeah.
And his response says that he feels acknowledged,
Mhm.
right? And that's what I share with clients is, if you properly acknowledge someone, you will know. Right?
Well, that brings, like, a whole like, the way that you acknowledged your husband in your example, it brings this whole level of presence, right? Because we're so easily distracted. It's easy to be like, "Thanks," you know, and even not even that, but bringing this whole level of presence of, "Thank you. This is how that made me feel, and I want you to see my appreciation for you." It's like this depth of connection that you bring with your presence, and through that acknowledgement. So it's a brilliant example of
Yeah.
that.
And the simplest way that I share it for people, because it's typically hard to understand when it's actually an acknowledgement and when it's not. And
Mhm.
the formula that I came up with is manners. For instance, thank you. I see what you did, and this is how it made me feel.
Mm,
Those three things, if someone watching this and wants to try this out, try it
yeah.
out. When somebody does something, say thank you, express what it is you saw them do and how it made you feel.
Mm.
It's an amazing experience.
I love formulas. I mean, I gotta tell you, like, give me a good system and a formula that anybody can use, and that's it right there. That's a bingo one for me. Oh, wow. So just 2 tools so far, and both incredible incredibly helpful. Like both of them, so incredibly helpful. This is just a really great conversation. Um, so when you're working with clients, I know you work on communication and stuff with them. When you're working on relationships with clients, what do you typically like to focus on with them?
To be honest, it literally pretty much always comes down to communication. That's where I spend the bulk of time because there's so many outshoots from that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that's usually the base. When I really delve in with a long-term client, that also will delve into intimacy
Mm.
because a lot of relationships don't people don't typically have a really clear understanding of how to build intimacy in a relationship in a way that deepens the relationship because when
Mm.
I ask people, most people, all they know when they hear the word intimacy is sex.
Yeah.
That's it. And
Yeah.
and so one of the things that I delve into with that is let's look at all the different aspects of intimacy because these are the things that actually deepen your relationship. Let's look at yeah, let's look at sex, right? Because that's an important aspect,
Mhm.
but let's also look at the other elements of intimacy. Let's look at the spiritual aspect, right?
Yeah.
Like what type of spiritual connection do you have, right? And it doesn't have to be, you know, typical religion,
Right.
but what is your worldview, right?
Yeah.
And that really draws people in based on that. I mean, it can make or break a relationship.
It
And
really can. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's the experiential, like the experiences you have together that create memories.
Mhm.
That's intimacy, right? When you start to my husband and I have been together 10 years, right? And for someone who's been married for 50 years, that may not seem like long, but when somebody has been together, let's say 1 year, right? It does look like a long time.
Yes,
And
right.
and so, I'm at that point in my relationship where a lot of my memories, when I reflect, are the experiences that I've had, and my husband is there. He's part of that memory. And
Yeah.
so that is really important for clients to understand because if you're dating for, let's say, 3 months or 6 months, and you're going, "Well, why haven't we gone to the next level?" You haven't had enough milestones together, right?
Right. Give yourself a minute.
Right?
Right, yeah.
Like, let's take a moment and look at you when you remember certain things, like, if that person's only been in your life for 6 months, they're probably not part of that memory that's deeply ingrained in you, that creates that intimacy. Right?
Yeah.
And so just all of the out branches of intimacy is also a big topic in what I do.
Well, and I think that there's probably a lot of gold to mine in combining the intimacy and the communication because we're culturally taught to withhold, right? Withhold, hold your cards close to your chest, as they say, but I've found, and it's kind of been liberating for myself and clients as well, is like, why don't you just go ahead and put those cards on the table, let everybody get a look at them because you're withholding 5, 6 months after you started dating this person isn't going to get you the end result that you're hoping for. Like, it's better to know that at month 1 than it is at month 6. So go ahead and do the gamble and see what happens, put it out there.
Yeah, that's something I have to say I've been very fortunate that my husband has that mastered, right?
Oh, it's good.
I came to the relationship with everything kinda like what you're saying, like, "Oh, let me hold that, like, let me suppress that, let me,"
Let me
you
not
know.
be the first person to say I love you.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
all of the things. I had
Mhm.
suppression mastered, right?
Mm.
And my husband's the opposite. He's one that, and he says this sometimes. He said he was really good at getting first dates, but second dates were tricky because he said he wanted to put it all out on the table. This is what you're gonna get, right? And people just aren't right? And
But when
and I
it's stuck, it's stuck, right, Lisa? When it's stuck, it's stuck. He was
right.
just getting rid of the riffraff first.
Exactly, and that's how he saw it, right? And
Mhm.
fortunately, somewhere in there, I understood that even though I didn't possess it, and I have learned so much from him over the years around that because one of the things is that he was an army ranger, and if you know anything about army rangers, one of the things that they're taught is how to basically go into a situation. They're taught how do you survive, right? How do
Mm,
you face your fears? Like they're taught
yeah.
no fear, right? And one of the things that he has taught me as it pertains to relationship is that you don't run from the things, you don't suppress the things or act like they don't exist. You go towards it.
Yeah.
And he gives this correlation of, when you're in, let's say hostile territory and you're a ranger, your best defense is to charge towards the target and catch them off
Mhm.
guard, right? And so he uses that in life.
Yeah.
I never have to worry about not knowing what my husband is thinking.
That's refreshing, actually. It seems like that would be really refreshing. You
It is
know, it is now that you've gotten a little accustomed to it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it goes again to that, like, well, we don't wanna experience pain, but, the pain at 1 month is a lot less than the pain 5, 10 years down the road. Like, let's just take care of it, address it now. I, I know people that don't even, like, talk about the whole kid thing before they get married, like, what's the expectations around having kids? Like, that's a deal breaker for relationships, you know? Y'all gotta be on the same page with that, and to not have a conversation before you take the commitment deeper is just like, "Oh, what do it's a fear that's holding them back from it, but yeah, it's really interesting how we kinda, like, skirt around these things and, just don't really wanna go there, but we kinda feel like maybe we have to, but we're gonna wait until we absolutely have to instead of just addressing it, ahead of time. But I know for me, and I'm sure the same is true for you and other couples, like, when you do face it, when you do meet it head on and address these areas of potential conflict or discussions, as you said, like you get an opportunity to grow so much closer after the fact because the air is clear there now and you can
Yes.
breathe and move.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest lessons that I have learned in deep relationship. And I feel so fortunate because one of my goals in working with clients is to have them experience that, right?
Mm,
Like most people never experience the other side of conflict
yeah,
because
yeah.
either they see it coming and they run, right? That was me. I was avoidant,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
Or they're bashing their heads together, not
yeah,
understanding how to navigate it well.
mhm,
But when you realize that there is a way to navigate conflict, maybe something like the talker listener card or whatever the
mhm,
tool is that a couple learns that works for them, right? On the other side, on the other side of conflict is just this magical place. And I
Yeah.
wish that experience for everyone, right?
Yeah.
I never experienced it until I met my husband. I
Mm.
never experienced it because as soon as I saw it was even in the distance, I was like, I'm out. I'm out. Right? No. And I approached it from a place of strength, right?
Mhm.
So it didn't look like I was scared. It looked like
Right.
I was strong and I wouldn't take that, right? That's how
Mhm.
I presented it. Like, no, absolutely not. I will not allow conflict in my life.
I got
Right?
no room or I got no space for that in my life. I don't yes,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
And my husband really has I always say this, like, our ideally, our partners become either a mirror or in my case, I say that my husband is a magnifying glass for all
Mm,
the things that I have
mm,
the opportunity to grow.
yeah,
So when there is a moment of conflict, and I say, I use the word conflict, and it's important to say that conflict doesn't always have to be a big C, right? It doesn't
yeah,
need to be this like major life altering thing. Conflict can be a little C, right? It could be a little glitch, right?
yeah. You didn't
And
pick your socks up off the floor. Yeah,
right,
that kind of
right,
little yeah,
right. And
yeah,
and so when I started to experience those moments and actually got through to the other side of that, and there would be this just newfound depth
mm,
to our relationship.
yeah,
I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
I wish this for everyone."
Because I mean, those couples that have been together for 50 years and he still holds the door open for her and holds the umbrella, like those are the couples like they haven't just avoided conflict. They haven't not ever argued. Like those are the couples who've walked through fire together and have gotten to that on the other side. And I'm sure they still have big C and little c conflict at 50 years together, but they know that it's worth it, right? And our culture is very still disposable, and it's become that way in terms of relationships. Well, we think it should just be easy. Should just be easy, and my piece isn't worth all this, right? And but like in your example, like that was a defense mechanism to keep you from having deeper intimacy and exploring this relationship. And I'm sure your husband is really grateful that you dove in, right? And that you were like, oh wait, like, yeah, let me do this. Let me give it a shot because you know, if we're constantly disposing of relationships that don't meet up with what we think that they should be, then we'll never find peace in this world because we are how many trillions of different multifaceted people. And it takes these communication skills and conflict skills to create a society that works for everyone and without just being lip service, but actually to create a society that works for everyone. Listening skills. Let's create this together. Don't be afraid of conflict and don't be afraid of communicating. Dive in because we need you to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just such a richer experience,
Yeah.
and one of the things that comes up a lot with clients is that I tend to attract the woman that was me 10
Mm.
plus years ago, right? And she's the professional woman that has checked all the boxes, right? She's reached her financial goal. She has the quote unquote, right job. She
Yeah.
she owns her house. She's checked all the boxes, right? But she hasn't mastered this whole love thing, right? And And it's fascinating that what typically comes up in that scenario is that we're looking for that perfect partner, right? That perfect partner that is just going to fit
Yeah.
effortlessly, and then we're going to sail off into the sunset, right? And it shows up over and over again. And I'm
Mhm.
constantly having these conversations of there is no perfect person. We're all imperfect.
Yeah.
All you can hope for is to meet an amazing person who has the core foundational values that you desire,
Mhm.
and both of you agree to show up with a growth mindset.
Yeah, and a willingness to do it. It's like a
Yeah,
willingness to see it through.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for people to really understand if they haven't experienced it.
Mhm.
Then they date someone and they see all the stuff that starts to come up, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
no, this is the right person." Right? "Oh, no, they're not perfect. This isn't the right one."
Yeah, right.
And I'm looking at myself 10 years ago going, "Oh, no, I was definitely not the perfect person. Oh, no, I definitely was not the right one." Right? But what I had was a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Like, every day, waking up committed to seeing what my blind spots are
Mm,
and owning it
mhm.
and figuring out what I can do to grow. And it's a
Yeah.
very humbling experience.
Yeah, yeah, and, we could use a little more of that too. Yeah, it's humbling and it's beautiful and enriching. It really feel like it helps life to be more rich, to be able to have that fullness of experience, even if sometimes it's not comfortable and sometimes it doesn't feel good. And I think it's totally normal once in a while to be like, is this what I really want? And have that little self check. Is this really worth it? I always tell people I do like a little percentage thing. I'm like, if I can lay out my relationship and we're still over 70% good, then I'm in. It's good, If it starts
Yeah,
to dip, then we'll like address some things and stuff. But like if my experience is at least 70%, then I'm very content and happy with what's going on, because it's real life and things are gonna happen.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because as you said that, I'm thinking of pretty much on a weekly basis, I'll get a message from a client saying,
Mhm.
"I don't think this is gonna work. I think it's over." Right? "This isn't working. This is the right one," right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I'm grateful that my default is avoidance, right?
Mm.
Because now, I was the girl that, like, I was not intending to get married. I was not intending to have a long-term relationship. I was the friends with benefits kind of girl, right?
Okay, yeah.
So so I can still reference my default, right? And it still comes up. I'm very transparent about the fact that there are moments when the avoidant Lisa shows up, but the difference is that I recognize her. I
Yeah.
go, "Oh, there she is. She'll be all right.
Mhm.
She'll right? Feel the
Yeah.
feeling and she'll be all right, right?"
Yeah.
And and so I see that with clients because I've been there. I know
Mm.
what that feeling is. I know that moment where you're going, "Oh, I don't think I have the capacity for this," or, "Oh,
Mhm.
no, I don't think I don't there's red flags." Right? Right?
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
have been a number of times where, granted, there are red flags. I don't wanna say there aren't, but there are, right? But I have found that a lot of times what we tend to perceive as red flags are just the excuses that we can use to bail.
Yep, yep. Yes, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Anything that's gonna validate those stories in our head about relationships and not good enough and, not worthy of love and stuff, even on the very deepest level that we all have that we're not worthy of love, you know? So we're just gonna pile them all on and be like, "Yeah, see? He can't love me the way I need to be loved." Yeah. So interesting. We're such interesting creatures when it comes to these stories that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
So I want people to know how they can find you. So share with us, your website and social media, how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. My Instagram, that's typically where I live on social media. My Instagram is effortless
Mhm.
living Lisa, and
Mm,
my website is magicinrelationships.com. And I'm actually right now preparing for my own event. So so that's going to be happening, I think, shortly after this airs. But yeah, magic in
awesome.
relationships. Oh,
And you have a summit freebie that you're giving, aren't you? You've got a meditation?
yeah, it's a heart-opening meditation,
Hmm.
and I express that it's a meditation for the woman that is wanting to be open to love, but it's also a meditation that allows you in those moments where you're wanting to run, as we just spoke of. It's a way to have a moment to step away and get centered and grounded. And I
Hmm.
have found that the best time to use this meditation is either the very beginning of your day or the very end of your day. And it's very nice at the end of the day, because typically at the end of the day we have encountered so many things, and our resistance is at its highest.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so it's a perfect way to just have a moment to ground.
Well, what a lovely, lovely giveaway. I just think that's absolutely true that, by the end of the day, we're just kind of like, but to be able to go to sleep with this openness and open-heartedness and anchoring into this love, I think that that's really lovely. I think, yeah, yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom about communication and relationships. I know that everybody needs this conversation and more.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day.